Africa, the continent, is not only significant for being 3 times bigger than the size of the United States, or for comprising 53 different countries, or having thousands of diverse ethnic groups. Africa also has fascinatingly and exquisitely retained many of its tribal objects and spiritual characteristics throughout the colonial, modern, and contemporary periods. Human and animal figures, visual abstract form, sculpture, performance art, fabric, textiles design, spirituality, and the female body are the tribal objects commonly used as part of shared Africanism and have astoundingly enriched African art throughout its magnificent journey till today. The indigenous art objects using human and animal figures can still be seen in the works of contemporary white African artists during the prehistoric period. Images of animals like elands, bisons, wild cattle, horses, and deer were obsessively used by the artists as religious objects. For example, evidence of a 3,000 years old sand rock painting found in Rosetta Stone Game Pass shelter at Drakensberg in South Africa, depicts the transformation of a shaman to an eland during his spiritual trance while connecting to the spirits of his ancestors. Similarly, metamorphoses of human to animal figures and masks are also being used today in the exhibitions of the white South African contemporary artist Jane Alexander in her photo montages. For example, in her most famous piece of art, The Butcher Boys, she uses half animals and half men as political and social characters by producing sentiments of discomfort and repugnance, which links to the human bestiality and violence against race and color. She is an example of many other white African artists who still use the indigenous theme of metamorphosis of human to animal. The ethnic use of colorful outfits, especially the animal masks with a wide array of indigenous music, is an illuminating African heritage still ongoing with creativity in the world of contemporary African American artists. Among many tribes, the Dogons in the Bandiagara region of Mali retain the use of masks along with the colorful outfits in Dama, the ritual dancing with the music to create binds to the celestial world of heaven. Similarly, Chicago-based artist and sculptorist Nick Cave created furry rabbit, twig and sound suits and various animal masks which bear a strong resemblance to Dogon masquerades. Nick Cave's use of masks with various animal suits while dancing is a burning example of direct impact of African ritual and performance traditions on the African American art world. Cave's tribal like craft, sculpture, masks, and performance art connects to his audience with the issues of unmasked conflicts of social injustice, which is akin to ethnic Dogon's binding of the celestial heaven. The moral and spiritual connotations of tribal art objects have always been symbolically emphasizing on the spirit world over the world of materialism. For instance, since the prehistoric period, the Kalahari Bushman tribe has no sense of ownership and always has a tradition of valuing spiritualism over material gains in their pursuit of happiness. A surprising survival of the same theme of moralism in denouncing material gains was reverberated by the contemporary African American artist Fahamu Picot. Picot, even being born in the consumer-oriented society in North America, shows the spiritual vacuum and denounces the current society for chasing human worth through material gain in his exhibition of visual art in the Lyons Art Gallery at Chelsea, New York, with the theme of pursuit of happiness. Using satirical images, Picot offers a spiritual and moral glimpse into the insecurities being played out in the hip-hop music and American popular culture through black masculinity. A sophisticated approach to visual abstraction of intangible images of spirits, mythical gods and powers, ancestral messages, and human figures with a pictorial flatness have immensely contributed to Western modern art. In the early 19th century, during the European colonial period of Africa, art icon Pablo Picasso gained access to viewing artifacts that were brought back from Africa as they were displayed in museums. Western artists Picasso, Georges Braque, and Henri Matisse all were inspired by the fragmentation of body in Africanism to find a new direction, Cubism. Specifically, the distinctive features of these tribal masks and the stylistic norms of sculptures taken from tribes such as the Songea tribe of Congo and the Dan tribe of the Ivory Coast inspired Picasso to create the well-known masterpiece Les Demoiselles d'Avignon. His abstract expressionism was considered a triumph in modern European and American painting, as was immediately adopted in the Western world and made today's modernism possible. The European colonial powers, after the Islamic invasions in many parts of Africa, specifically the French, British, and the Portuguese, undertook a systematic dismantling of indigenous art objects as traditional African identity in order to establish colonial rule, slave trade, and white supremacy. Samuel Fosso, a self-portrait contemporary African photo artist who created an archive of engagement with colonial and post-colonial histories and identities, satirically reflects the cultural legacy of European colonial influence on African culture, what he calls the mental colonization. Photography was the first medium of contact with Europeans, and Fosso uses photographs with mocking and varying costumes to show that how identity is invaded, determined, and influenced a great deal due to Africans' lack of control over European colonial costumes and photography. Simultaneously, his works reminds Africans having the power to retain their own identity through his series African Spirits and the Emperor of Africa, impersonating civil rights and African independence leaders in his solo exhibition by the Walter Collection in New York. Besides Fosso, two important and widely known commercial photographers from Mali, Seydou Keita and Malika Sedibi, reflect the impact of French colonization before and after the independence in 1960 through the mesmerizing photographs of members of their communities, placing them within the context of the history of portrait photography in West Africa since the beginning of colonial period in 1840. Traditional African textiles have been one of the defining forms of aesthetic expressions, and African artist El Anatsui uses African textile weaves to make his political statements by illuminating connections and continuities between past and recent modes of African art. Tribal Africans used cloth not only for personal adornment, but also as a powerful medium of communication for many centuries. Anatsui's structure in this piece is made of tens of thousands of repurposed flattened metal beer and liquor bottle caps using copper wire. It signifies the treacherous alcohol introduced by the slave traders and colonials as tools to exploit Africans. Moreover, it purposely molds the finished flat cloth into forms, folds, and wrinkles that emulates a tribal textile weave. The piece is extremely large, but depicts extraordinary skill and constructive ingenuity. His metal tapestries attest to his Ghanaian root, echoing the structure of the emblematic Ashanti ceremonial cloth kente. Like the tribal bound objects of bird feathers, bees, Anatsui uses all manners of found metals to highlight Africa's heritage as well as the adverse effects on Africa by globalism, consumerism, and waste. The black female body has always been objects of African tribal art. Wengichi Mutu, an exemplary Kenyan-born African diaspora feminist artist who currently lives in Brooklyn, shows hybridity in large-scale collage paintings and ink to create feminist issues idealizing female figures out of fragmented parts. Her creations are from small figures in magazines and textbooks by slicing, cutting, and removal from context, and its eventual juxtaposition in incongruous arrangements are obviously analogous to tribal African tradition of gender inequality, female fertility, and high death rates. Tribal African art and objects of human and animal figures, visual abstract form, sculpture, performance art, fabric, textile design, beads have their own special forms of cultural expression, molding them into a varied but recognizable style that was uniquely beautifully and personally African, no matter whether they were created by African Americans, African diaspora, colonial, or white African artists. In order to maintain a strong bond between the fragmented concept of black art, some African American Chicago-based artists formed a group named AfriCobra to relate Africanism and its artwork to the black masses, aiming to use art for social impact. Rather than separating the artwork for a group of well-educated elite, AfriCobra's effort is to be collaborative. The idea is to synthesize all-encompassing transnational aesthetic to unify internationally. Choosing a theme of African American heroes and legends, the members created the controversial Wall of Respect, which sparked a revolutionary trend of similar walls emerging in major cities across the nation. By committing themselves to the principles of social responsibility, artistic excellence, local artistic involvement, and the promotion of pride in black self-identity, AfriCobra artists help grasp onto the only thing that remains of their lost identity, the identity of descending from Africa. African tribal objects were not originally created for visual appreciation, rather for religious and cultural purposes. Today, African art pieces are sold for millions in the auction houses of Sotheby's and Christie's in the West. The recent Myron Kunin collection of African art at Sotheby's, New York, achieved a historical total of $41,617,500. Tribal objects build bridges with their thematic and spiritual backgrounds, being inclusive to the colonial, African, African American, contemporary and diaspora artists, making the African art as more enriching and diverse. After all, tribal African art objects began with the most common and oldest theme of love. Love for the artistic creator as the connection with his creation, mankind, which originated in Africa.